You know, we have the most distinguished panel. I don't think it can get better than that. I mean, we have the most distinguished panel here, and I want to introduce, I'll start with Senator Dave Cortese. A quick introduction, even though I know most of you know him. He was elected in November of 2020 to represent State Senate District 15, which encompasses much of Santa Clara County in the heart of Fremont. I met him through, is Ash still here, Ash Conrad? He left? Oh, okay. So I met him through our Assembly member Ash Conrad when he was introducing him to some of us several years back. And thanks for supporting our event ever since. Along with his accomplished career as an attorney and business owner, the senator previously served on the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors for over a decade, with 4 years as board president, on the San Jose City Council for 8 years, including 2 years as vice mayor, and as a trustee for the East Side Union High School District for 8 years. Now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing District Attorney Nancy O'Malley, great friend. She has actually, this is her third, this is the third time we are having this conference here, and she has always been very kind to join us. She has served as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer in Alameda County since being appointed by the Alameda County Board of Supervisors in September 2009. Subsequently, she was elected to the position in November 2010, 14, and 2018. She is a nationally recognized expert in issues involving violence against women, violence against persons with disabilities, and interpersonal violence, including sexual assault, domestic violence, elder abuse, child abuse, stalking, and human exploitation and trafficking. Thank you. Thank you for being with us. And now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Dr. Eric Bishop. Dr. Eric Bishop is the Superintendent President of Ohlone Community College District, and he has served for more than 30 years in higher education. Dr. Bishop most recently served as Associate Superintendent of Student Services and Legislative Engagement for Shakti College in Rancho Cucamonga. He also served on the Executive Board of the California Chief Student Services Officers Association. In his experience, he has overseen the plurality of student services officers while being an advocate for access. Dr. Bishop was our honored guest speaker when we celebrated our Unity Dinner on Zoom during the pandemic. Thank you again for being with us. And now I'm honored to introduce our police chief, Sean Washington. He joined the Fremont Police Department in 1997, and he has worked several assignments, gaining experience. He was promoted to the rank of sergeant in 2007, lieutenant in 2011, and captain in 2015 as commander of the Special Operations Division. He was appointed police chief on October 1st, 2021. As police chief, he is responsible for all aspects of the Fremont Police Department, including emergency services provided 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The Fremont Police Department has 319.5 full-time employees, of which 199 are sworn positions. The department is a full-service law enforcement agency and also provides some services by contract to other agencies. And I'm also very honored to be working as on the advisory of police chief. And now I have distinct pleasure of introducing Lieutenant Ray Kelly. Ray Kelly has been a member of the Alameda County Sheriff's Office for the past 26 years. He currently serves as the Sheriff's Chief of Staff and Communications Director for the agency. He works closely as an advisor to the Sheriff to manage the day-to-day operations of the agency. Ray Kelly has spent the majority of his career in operations, working in key leadership positions in both patrol and investigations. He has worked with victims of violent crime, sexual abuse, domestic violence, and human trafficking. He has helped manage national emergencies, tragic events, and kept Bay Area residents informed in a very calm and professional manner. Thanks to our friend Joe Joha. Where is Joe? Joe is okay. Thanks to him for introducing us to Ray Kelly. And last but not least, we have our wonderful moderator for this discussion, and that is Jasmine Kanoja. Jasmine Kanoja is an activist, she's an anchor, and she's also with Yo India TV, she's a producer. And Yo India TV presents diversity, community benefit, culture, and from the San Francisco Bay Area, California. It's airing worldwide on social media, cable, and internet networks. Thank you all very much. Jasmine, where is Jasmine? No, she's not. So I'll give this to you and pass this on. And here we are.
So once again, welcome in everyone, and thank you Mr. Jeevan Zutshi and IACF for this opportunity. As you know, the panel discussions topic is racial equity and hate crime. So I'm going to talk a little bit and give some background into some of the mini research that I have done on this topic, and then one by one we'll get the expertise from our honorable panelists. So racial equity and inclusion is reflective of our collective values. This entails providing people, especially the marginalized communities, structurally and systemically what they need to enjoy full, healthy lives and having prevalence of social, racial, and institutional justice. A society in which all people have dignity, resources, power, and self-determination to fully thrive, and there are no racial disparities. Inclusion is a qualitative measure of representation and participation. Focusing on diversity without addressing equity or fairness is superficial and problematic. Therefore, differentiated and targeted strategies should be implemented rather than same or equality-focused strategies to address varied needs and to attain fair or equitable outcomes. However, hate and bias divide the communities. Hate can lead to crime and violence in schools, places of worship, and local communities. So a hate crime is a traditional offense like murder, arson, or vandalism with an added element of bias. For the purposes of collecting statistics, the FBI has defined a hate crime as a criminal offense against a person or property motivated in whole or in part by an offender's bias against a race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, gender, or gender identity. Historically, a major part of defining crimes as hate crimes is determining that they have been committed against members of historically oppressed groups. As an example, the web portal Stop RP Hate, which allows victims of hate crime to self-report incidents in one of several Asian languages, has logged over 9,000 reports since March of 2020. More than 12% of the incidents involved physical violence. Women were the targets in more than two-thirds of reported incidents. 40% of the reports came from California, which is home to the largest RP population in the US. The San Francisco police has marked a 567% increase in anti-Asian hate crime reports in 2021 over the year 2020. The relative decrease was only seen in reports of hate crimes against Arabs or Muslims and Latinos. Last week, on 7th March 2022, two California men were sentenced on conspiracy and hate crime charges for attacking 5 victims inside a restaurant while shouting ethnic slurs, hurling chairs at the victims, and threatening to kill them. The FBI conducted the investigation with the assistance of Beverly Hills Police Department, and according to the facts admitted in the plea agreements, the defendants, who identify as members of the Armenian American community, attacked 5 victims inside a family-owned Turkish restaurant on 4th November 2020 because of their anger about Turkey's support of Azerbaijan in its conflict with Armenia. So it took over a year to have the verdict and punish the criminals. So what's happening in California? Let's look at the demographic diversity first and then see through the policies and practices with the racial justice lens via this panel discussion. The 2022 population of the state of California is 39.7 million. In religious terms, 63% of Californians associate with a Christian-based faith, 9% are affiliated with non-Christian faiths like Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, Jews, etc. And the rest of the 27% are unaffiliated individuals. California houses the most Roman Catholics, Hindus, and Muslims in the whole of the United States. Religions indigenous to California include Laotian Satanism. The Ekankar religion was founded in California. In racial terms, according to the most recent American Community Survey or ACS by the US Census Bureau, topping the list are whites, who are 59.7% or 23.4 million, followed by Asians, who are 14.49% or 5.6 million, and then other races comprise 13.95% of the population. Black or African Americans are 5.79% or 2.2 million. 2 or more races are 4.8%. Native Americans are 0.7%. Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islanders are 0.4%. So the most populous state is also one of the most racially diverse, boasting the largest population of whites in the US, largest number of Native Americans, and the 5th largest population of African Americans. The Asian population, which is around 5 million, makes up about 1/3 of the nation's total Asian American population. In gender terms, 50.3% of the population is female, 49.6% is male, which is almost a fair 1:1 ratio. And it is also notable that around 5% people associate themselves as transgender or LGBTQ+. And California legislature has passed around 174 bills to advance their rights. In terms of eating habit, approximately 8% of Californians are vegetarians. In terms of language, strictly English-speaking Californians are 55%. Non-English spoken by the largest group is Spanish, which is spoken by 28% of the population, and the rest 15.5% speak other non-English languages. California has the highest concentration of Vietnamese or Chinese speakers in US. Looking at the linguistic diversity more closely, over 200 languages are known to be spoken and read in California, of which at least 100 are indigenous to California. Overall, California has a healthy national growth rate in population. Immigration, especially during the gold rush, was a major contributing factor to the diversity of the population. The estimated ratio of illegal immigrants is 6.3% in the state, and the population as a whole is projected to surpass 50 million by 2050. So let's get to the cause of the hate crime, and I will start with a question for Senator Dave Cortese. So violent acts against RPs have been skyrocketing since the pandemic due to China's alleged involvement in infecting the world with COVID-19, which was called Chinese flu, Kung flu, and other racial epithets. In May 2020, the Polish-based Never Again Association published its report titled The Virus of Hate, the Brown Book of Epidemic, that documented numerous acts of racism, xenophobia, and discrimination that occurred in the wake of coronavirus pandemic, as well as cases of spreading hate speech and conspiracy theories about the epidemic by the alt-right. In the past 6 weeks, 2 fatal attacks have occurred in the New York City. Christina Yuna Lee, who was stabbed to death by a stranger who followed her into the Chinatown apartment, and Michelle Elisa Go, who was pushed in front of a Times Square subway train. So, Senator Cortese, what do you think is the primary cause of Asian American hate crime?
It's a very big question, and thank you very much. And I'm sure everyone in this room has very strong feelings and very strong impressions in their own analysis of all of that. But of course, there's a connection between speech that refers to the virus as an Asian virus or a Chinese virus, and the deep biases and prejudices and hate that exist in this society. There's no question about that. There's no dancing around that. And I do believe, for whatever it's worth, as someone who's a grandson of a European immigrant, that this country has been European-centric, and we will never know, of course, but I do believe myself, in my heart of hearts, that if the virus had emanated from a place in Europe, you would not be seeing or hearing that kind of speech. And that goes to the root of the problem that we have in this country, an ongoing cultural shift that has been exposed, that has not fully occurred, has been exposed. People have been working on it for a long time. I see former Congressman Mike Honda in the room who fought these battles locally and in Congress for years. We probably talk about Assemblyman Raj Kalra as the first Indo-American ever elected in the state assembly. That's great. And I know in some ways he wishes he had been the first. It's a great moniker, but it also speaks to this issue. So this hate speech need that is particularly when it's associated with assaults, when it's associated with battery, when it's associated with bullying, when it's associated with intimidating behavior, when it enters into places like the Los Gatos town hall meeting as intimidation, which becomes physical to the city council or to the mayor, Maria Gosea, then we need to act. And I think that the one thing that has been a change already, and I don't know how many of you feel that there's so many Asian Americans in this room, and this would be much more visceral for you, I'll admit that, than me, but I feel like I have observed solidarity and unification among Asian Americans in the Bay Area, particularly, because that's what we see, and I think up and down the state. And when I say that, I've been in about 12 elections. I was running some years ago, about 8 years ago, in an election. I was going to visit on Santa Clara Street, not far from Cindy Chavez's home. I was going to visit a very particular Indo-American group that happened to be meeting down there. They were building a Gurdwara in Evergreen, and I went to visit with them. And I stopped to get a bottle of water at the 7-Eleven store across the street on Santa Clara Street, and on the change that was given back to me was a dollar bill with Asian hate language written on it, a statement. And I was so rattled by that I went and before I started speaking to the group, or when I started speaking, I showed them the bill and I said, this is not acceptable. And of course they were concerned, but they came up to me afterwards, the leader of the group, and said that wasn't directed at us. And there had been a lot of anti-Muslim sentiment going on at that time, 8 or 9 years ago, and the feeling was, it's hate speech, but it's really not directed at us. I think that misunderstanding is over. It's directed at all of us. And I think the hate speech and the associated crimes that we experienced over the last several years, particularly through the prior presidential administration, in my opinion, during that era, have, on the one hand, brought great solidarity to us, but on the other hand, very much escalated the kind of crimes and the number of crimes that we're seeing. The law enforcement folks here would have probably better data than I have, but in 2019, there were over 7,000 hate incidents reported, according to a study by Cal State University San Bernardino Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism. We know that number went up by 2020. And again, we're seeing anecdotally all around us, this boldness around street crime that's associated with hate speech. And you indicated a couple of examples of that, not just here, but as far away as New York and other places. So it's very real, but I guess what I'm saying is thank you all for being here and being here in solidarity. And I know when I hear the assembly members from my district who are part of our Senate district, part of our legislature, Evan Lowe and Ash Kalra, speak publicly about this issue, that they speak also with a great appreciation for the solidarity that we're seeing that exists now. And it's the only way we're going to keep shifting the tide. Thank you for all the folks that have been fighting and speaking up in the past. Sometimes, the only member of Congress at the time, or the only member of the community speaking up. Now, we're not alone. We have law enforcement folks here. We have people from really every walk of life and different ethnicities. One of the things that happened last year that was, I thought, a great bill, these things kind of sneak by you sometimes, was a bill that the law in California said that hate that's identified or targeted at nationality is a crime. But it said nothing about immigration status. And of course, a lot of what we're really seeing is anti-immigration or anti-immigrant hate these days. And certainly the country has a sad history of that, regardless of European Americans too were hated upon at one time. I know that from my own grandfather's stories. But that bill last year that passed with signing the law said include immigration status in the definition of nationality. Therefore, immigration status that is used in hate speech is now a crime in the state of California. There were a number of other bills. I'm going to stop because other people want to speak, but if you ask other questions about what the state has been doing, I'll be more than happy to let you know. Some of the measures just in the last 12 to 14 months that we've adopted to start addressing this problem are certainly not done at the level of the state of California. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. The next question is for Dr. Eric Bishop. So as per Chapter 73 of Assembly Concurrent Resolution number 108, ACR 108, filed with the Secretary of State in 2008, which designated June 2008 as Hate Crimes Awareness Month, it was resolved that California needs to remain vigilant in promoting tolerance to address growing white supremacist movements such as Aryan Nation and Aryan Brotherhood in California that recruit our youth through music, internet, and other media and information outlets, and that the Anti-Defamation League reported that hate rock concerts are organized yearly in Southern California by labels like White Heat Productions and Condemned Records, which feature bands that encourage hate violence in their lyrics. So, Dr. Bishop, being at Ogloni Community College, you work with the youths of all ethnicities day in and day out. So, what is your take on this?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I think there's a root in education to what we've seen, and one of the things I often say is, I think one of the struggles we have is, from an education standpoint, is we are the most geographically illiterate country in the world, right? So we don't believe or see anything beyond our national border, and at the same time, we don't see anything beyond our regional border or our local border. And so our tolerance level comes to what I see in front of me as understanding. But I also look at a room like this and recognize that you don't see events like this in many of our other states. Right? And as a journalist, as we talked earlier, one of my fundamental beliefs is that sunshine is the best disinfectant. So the idea that we can't hide from it and have to talk about it and have to call it out and have to point it out. So as we're working with, from a college standpoint, we're going to talk about it, we're going to address it, we're not going to hide it. If something happens, we're going to come together. And you have to be upfront with it and recognize that people are people, and where does it come from? So we work with our students, this is who Ogloni College is. We've claimed that we want to be an equity-based, anti-racist institution, with the idea being that if you have a problem with that, then this isn't the institution for you. Right? And so that we want that in our curriculum, we want that in our policy, we want that in our place, so that as we're educating the next generations and the current generations, that spreads into the workforce, that spreads into the family conversations, that spreads into our local communities, that we can be in communities where we are open to having conversations and events like this and moving forward. And that's the only way that we address it. And then the honesty of calling truth to power and teaching how to do that so that when you see it, you call it out and you address it. Because too often we just don't want to get involved. We move into a society of not wanting to get involved, and that doesn't get us anywhere. And I'm hoping somewhere in our answer to the question you actually
Thank you so much. And the next one is for Chief Sean Washington. Super sociologists Jack McDermott and Jack Levin's 2002 study, 66% of the hate crimes in US are attributable to thrill seeking, which means that most perpetrators engage in hate crimes for excitement and drama, while other perpetrators engage in hate crimes out of ideological reasons. They consider themselves to be crusaders, often for a religious or racial cause, or believe that they are protecting their communities or are taking revenge by doing so. So, Chief Washington, how do you reform or transform such criminals in your custody so that they don't repeat such acts due to their false belief or undue feelings of excitement?
All right, well, that's a very complex and difficult question for me. Because how do you really address ignorance? How do you address segments of our community that want to hurt and harm individuals based on what they look like, who they love, or what they believe in? I'm not even sure it's possible for law enforcement, or even if it's the role of law enforcement. But what I can do is reassure our community that we will do everything we can as a police department to ensure that we bring folks to justice that commit these horrible crimes. That I can assure our community. And hopefully that will be a deterrent for any future crimes related to this topic. You know, the criminal side of it is one thing. You know, there are very specific elements that have to be met in order for incidents to rise to the level of an actual crime. So things like speech, hateful rhetoric that someone may speak or write, unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily rise to a crime in a lot of cases. And, you know, although in our city we investigated 7 hate crimes in 2021, which was up from 4 the previous year. The impact of those that don't rise to the level of criminal activity is just as severe. In fact, you know, I've spoken very candidly about recently, you know, as a new police chief, I've made it my commitment to go out and engage with every single district within our city, because I think it's important for me to hear from the individuals that I serve, and really to pay attention to the needs and concerns of our community. And so with COVID, we've been doing these meetings via Zoom, like everyone else. And I bring this forward because I talk about the difference between a crime and a hate incident. And on one of my district meetings, I myself, I was targeted by hate speech. And so I didn't even know a Zoom bomb was a thing. I had no idea what a Zoom bomb is. I do now. But that's when an individual will take over a Zoom call and they use control of the meeting, and they can speak and write things on the call. But the impact that had was just as severe, even though it didn't rise to the level of a crime. I hadn't heard those words in quite a few years directed towards me. So it renewed my commitment and my understanding of how hurtful these hate incidents can be, even if they don't rise to the level of a crime. So my 13-year-old daughter overheard my wife and I talking about this incident, and she's 13, and she asked me, well, what's going on, Dad, and why? And that broke my heart that I had to explain to my 13-year-old daughter that in 2022, we still have to deal with this stuff. So, you know, I never want to minimize the impact, although we had, and I use the word, you know, with caution only, because every single one of these hate crimes are significant. So although we have over 235,000 residents here and 7 hate crimes, that's still a significant number, even though relatively speaking, or compared to other jurisdictions, it's quote unquote low. The impact is still very significant. So, you know, I can't directly address the question because I just don't know if I have the ability to really reform the thoughts and ideas of folks who have hateful thoughts in their heads, and they want to express those thoughts or act upon those thoughts. But again, a message to anyone who is thinking about doing these type of crimes, I can assure you that we will spare no expense and no resource to bring those folks to justice. So with that, I guess that's how I would respond to your question.
Thank you, Chief Washington. And you mentioned a little about the hate speech versus hate crime. And my next question to Nancy O'Malley is something very relatable to what you said. So a hate crime is a criminal act or attempted criminal act committed against a victim or their property because the victim is perceived to be a member of a protected class, including disability, gender, nationality, race, ethnicity, religion, gender, or sexual orientation. A hate crime can include a physical assault, threatening phone calls, or vandalizing personal property. On the other hand, The freedom of speech as protected by the US Constitution allows one to express opinions and ideas as long as it does not interfere with the civil rights of others. However, if this behavior escalates to threats being made or criminal acts being carried out, it could become classified as a hate crime. At the same time, threatening words do not constitute a hate crime offense if it is apparent to the victim that the person does not have the ability to carry out the threat. Hate crime laws enhance the penalties associated with conduct which is already criminal under other laws, while hate speech laws criminalize a category of speech. Under the First Amendment of the US Constitution, people cannot be prosecuted simply for their beliefs. So, District Attorney Nancy O'Malley, could you please magnify the connotation of these legal terms for our audience and viewers?
Thank you very much. So first I want to say that we have, on an average every year, we serve more than 3,000 Asian victims of crime. But we know that we can double or triple that number of those who have been subjected to hate speech or hate behavior that may not rise to a crime. And I will say that there's crime, and then there's crime what we can prove in court. So in order to take a case to court, we have to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the behavior or the action was motivated by hate or prejudice or some other sentiment. What's important, and the chief touched on this, is that even if it's the behavior that we see that's reported to us or to the police does not give rise to a crime, we nevertheless get involved. So we put up a hate crime hotline several years ago. Mostly it started when the Muslim community was being attacked unnecessarily because of their religion or the way they looked or the way they conducted themselves. So we encouraged people to call the hotline, and we followed up on every one of those calls so that we could at least educate people about that behavior. And while it might not have included an assault or some other behavior, it nevertheless was a crime against that person. So I think it's important that we never forget that if every time we have one of these situations, it's an opportunity to educate. And that's why I'm happy to hear you speak about school and the environment in school, because for so much of this, it's driven by ignorance, it's driven by prejudice, it's driven by fear of something different. So that's the first thing. The second thing is what we've seen is a huge uptick in the last couple of years, as you all know, where it's really been focused on attacking Asian people who look different or have a different culture. Part of our job is to build the trust that the chief talked about with the community so that people feel like they can report to us what happened to them. So part of what the strategy in my office is that we have a very diverse workplace. We have individuals that come from all cultures so that when we have a crime committed against an elder Asian person whose culture would not say talk to the police, their culture would say go in my house and never come out again. And so part of what we have to do is make our system more sensitive to the cultures and the cultural background that people bring to this country. In that regard, we have a special team that really focuses on the crimes that are committed against Asians. But we have a whole victim advocate team that works with people that we can't prosecute the crime because it doesn't give rise to that beyond a reasonable doubt. But nevertheless, it is a crime committed and directed at somebody. And I think that from a standpoint of a prosecutor office, that's very important that we are not ignoring it just because we can't take it to court. That we will take all our efforts and put all our efforts to make sure that people know that we will stand with them. Because So many times, I will say that when we thought it was started as just hate speech, that something happened, a person resists, and all of a sudden now it is a crime. We've had Asian individuals, older individuals get killed because they resisted. You see it on TV. I mean, our police department showed the videos, and our news shows videos of people being attacked just because of who they are, and they're perceived as less powerful in our community. And so the message that we have, and this is not just a message outbound, it's also a message inbound. So in my office, we created a division of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Terry Wiley, who's the chief assistant here tonight, he oversees that division because we want to make sure that even in our own office, that we're educating people about the different cultures and calling out behaviors that are not acceptable. Alameda County is the 4th most diverse county in the United States. So it shocks me still that we're dealing with this level of hate or this level of aggression based on someone's ethnicity or their gender or their sexual orientation and things like that. So from my perspective, I look at it as crime, yes, but I look at it more broadly as humanitarian. And when we receive the reports from the police and we realize, we can't necessarily bring this into the courtroom, it does not mean we don't address it. And I think that the more we address it, and for sure, the more we educate people, and children are being raised in households where there's hate against other people. So we have opportunities to work with our schools and to work with our colleges and to work with our community to educate people so that we don't have someone who's attacking a person like what happened with the chief, or attacking people what happened with the elderly Asian man who got knocked down and killed, or what happens with so many people in our community just because of who they are and how they present in our society. So I think that answers it. And now we're happy to see our Attorney General here, Rob Bonta.
Welcome in, Rob. So carrying on with the panel, my next question would be for Lieutenant Chief of Staff Ray Kelly. So the next question would be on the underreporting of hate crimes. The United States Department of Justice's National Criminal Victimization Survey reveals that 56% of hate crimes are not reported to the police. The primary reasons of underreporting of hate crime can be attributed to the factors like victims' lack of knowledge about the criminal justice system, fear of retaliation, linguistic and cultural barriers, immigration status, and prior negative experience with governmental agencies. Women in particular are often embarrassed to report. Experts estimate that an average of 250,000 hate crimes were committed each year between 2004 and 2015 in the United States, and the majority of these were not reported to law enforcement. So we know that Fremont Police Department is all poised to make a speedy investigation and pay heed to the special sensitivity in regards to the emotional trauma experienced by victims of these crimes. And Nancy talked about the hotline by the Alameda County District Attorney. So overall, the rate of crime in Fremont is 28 per 1,000 residents, or 2.8% per standard year, which is by and large related to property and not related to violence. People who live in Fremont consider the northeast part of the city to be the safest. So, Ray, tell us your experience regarding reporting and underreporting of hate crimes, or the reporting gap in Fremont, and your overall strategy and approach in handling different kinds of crime in Fremont.
Well, thank you. I can speak directly in regards to crime in general, as I've worked my 26 years as an investigator. I worked very closely with Nancy O'Malley before she was our district attorney, working with special victims, especially around sexual assault, human trafficking, and a lot of other issues. I just dealt with a family the other day where it was a 12-year-old girl who had no resources, nowhere to turn in regards to how she was feeling. She was an LGBT youth, and she ended up taking her life and was found by her family. And there will be no real investigation into that. There'll be no a lot of closure there. We'll offer services, but at the end of the day, that young girl lost her life. And really was thinking about it because I have a 12-year-old daughter as well, and I wondered, would my daughter come talk to me about those issues? And that relates not just to that one story that I'm telling you now, but we deal with these issues every day in law enforcement. And it's been a rough go for us for the last few years. I'm not gonna lie, it's been painful. It's been difficult. And we've never stopped loving our communities and caring about them, but we did feel for a minute that we weren't so loved. And then I think this pandemic highlighted a lot of the anger and the hatred that we have seen on the news. And I know I work closely with our Bay Area media to highlight those hate crime stories. And like the chief said, and like Nancy said, there's only so much that the law allows us to do with hate crimes. Some of them do skirt the line as to whether they are hate crimes or not. But I think we as a community, as a society, should say what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. That we should be policing ourselves within our own schools, within our own job sites, amongst our friends, as to what we're accepting and what we're not accepting. I mean, we all wouldn't have been in this room 2 years ago without COVID masks on. It would have been unacceptable. Now it's more acceptable. So things change, but I think that we have to continue to work with our legislative partners to promote that safety. And there's 2 cases that really bother me that have happened here in Alameda County in the last year. One is Jasper Wu, who was a 2-year-old boy that was murdered in a vehicle traveling through the 880 corridor. And then the second one was very close to me, was David Nguyen. He was our recruit from the sheriff's office that was tragically murdered at the toll plaza just driving home. Those cases are still under investigation, and we don't know whether or not they were targeted because they were members of the Asian community. But I spent a lot of time with those families, and I spent a lot of time with families that have been victims of hate crime. And I think Sean's experience that he talked about, it brings a lot of pain and a lot of tears. And so I think, I see our Attorney General here as well, but I think that we need to work on these issues. Law enforcement, we can provide more, we need to invest more into the kids. We recently were asked to leave a lot of schools, defund our SRO programs. I think it's a big mistake. I think we need to bring law enforcement officers back into our schools, have them as mentors and teachers. And we're starting to see that reverse again, but we need to bring in, and it's never been a better time to get young people engaged in law enforcement, and we're seeing our ranks and the amount of diversity coming into